Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. It is the 20th of February 2022, and we have a palindrome date. It's going to read the same whichever way we read it, so that's pretty cool. As always, this is useful. A like, subscribe, comment, and share really is appreciated, and hit that bell icon to get notified of new updates. As always, I have the chapters along the bottom of the screen, so you can jump to a specific update if you don't care about everything else that's happening. And yes, there is an addition to the studio. I got my nice, shiny 100,000 subscriber award did arrive. So obviously I'm super excited about that. And so I'm still trying to work out. I think it's just going to go there. But hey, again, thank you for all your support to help us get to that 100,000 mark. New videos this week. So I did kind of a deep dive all about Azure AD Identity Protection, its capabilities, how I can use it both to report on risks of my sign-ins of my users, but then also do enforcement based on that. And then a little quick video just understanding Azure Compute Units and how that can be used to understand the performance of the various virtual machine SKUs. On to new updates this week. So AKS now has tag support. So this is separate from things like taints and labels that is part of Kubernetes. This is the Azure Resource Manager tags, those key value metadata pairs I can use for maybe things like billing, overall management, set a business unit. I might use it as part of a chargeback exercise. I can configure the tags on the cluster and the node pools. And then also via the Kubernetes manifest, I can also configure it on resources like public IPs, like disks and files. And the exact syntax varies between is it a public IP or disk and file. AKS has the CIS benchmarks available now. So you can actually jump over and look at those. So if I need the documentation for the various compliance, I can jump to this and it's in the description below. And I can see all of the details that actually went in for that CSI compliance, CIS benchmark compliance. Moving on, AKS Kubernetes v1.23 support is now in preview. Now, with every version of Kubernetes, there were new features added. One of the biggest ones about this was dual stack. The IPv4, IPv6 ability, and that went GA in Kubernetes. That does not mean dual stack is GA in AKS. The dual stack is available in preview for KubeNet, but not Azure CNI. So just because Kubernetes went GA with dual stack, again, AKS is in preview for KubeNet today. Windows Server Azure Edition Core, not desktop experience, hotpatch has now gone GA. Now this is when I'm using the Azure Auto Managed service. And now I don't really have to worry about reboots for most things for patching of the operating system. It can patch in memory, so really reducing the number of times I have to do any kind of maintenance reboot. Remember that Azure Auto Managed service really lets me take IaaS, where normally I have all the responsibility, and almost treat it like PaaS. I now only do management on an exception basis, and that Azure Auto Manage does most of the other things for me. So I'm going to use the Windows Server Azure Edition image, and again, core, not desktop experience, and I'm going to use that auto orchestrated patch option as part of that. So virtual machine scale set predictive autoscale is in preview. So this is a really cool idea. If I think about, okay, what is this talking about? So think about virtual machine scale sets and auto scaling. So ordinarily I can think about, look, there's some workload. I get that varying amount of work come in. And what I want to do is with auto scale rules, traditionally, we say, hey, if CPU is greater than 70%, for example, add 2 instances. If CPU is less than 30%, well, hey, go ahead and remove 2 instances. So I'm reacting to the event. Now consider if it was like a really steep peak, then me adding those instances takes time. So there's a period of time where there's not enough resource and the end performance would be impacted. So what this new capability is actually going to do, this predictive autoscale, is using machine learning, and it's going to look at history. And it's a minimum of 7 days it has to be able to look at, ideally 15. It's only looking at CPU today, and it's going to look at what's that seasonality, what is the predictable cyclical frequency use, and then up to an hour in advance, it will autoscale. So rather than reacting when I've hit some peak and taking time where there's some performance impact, it will scale in advance. For example, hey, I know this is coming. Okay, I'm going to scale up the number of instances now so the resources are there at the time. Now, this is only going to work if it is cyclical. The machine learning can learn, hey, there is this certain seasonality where we get these CPU increases. I can do it in a forecast mode initially just to look and see what it's going to do, and then actually enable it to make those changes as required. But that's now there in preview, so you can actually go and try that right now. And then carrying on from that, ACE v3 has been out for a while now. The migration is now available from ACE v2 to ACE v3. This is going to support both external and internal load balancer configurations. The app service plan would be updated to an isolated v2 as part of this migration. And I can trigger this from a number of different places, like portal, templates, etc. New Azure Functions table bindings is in preview. We have both input and output bindings from our Azure Functions to various types of service. So now with this new tables binding, I can connect to things like Cosmos DB Tables API. I can connect to storage tables using identity-based connections. I can bind to various Azure.data.tables, use tables with the various V5 storage extensions. This is available as a NuGet package. You can go and get this and start using this in your Azure Functions. Carrying on compute, there's a number of different bursting types of service we have, and many virtual machines have a disk bursting. So virtual machine SKUs and sizes have a certain storage performance, IOPS and throughput. And many of them support bursting beyond that for up to a 30-minute window if I've accrued credit, i.e. I've operated below my provisioned IOPS and throughput. I can exceed it for up to 30 minutes for burst scenarios. Maybe it's a boot up scenario, it's some log on storm, there's some batch job that's running, traffic spike, whatever it might be. I can exceed my provisioned IOPS and throughput for up to 30 minutes if I've accrued the credit. So they've added some new VMs as part of this, the M series, the MSV2 series, and the MDS V2 all now support this free disk bursting as well. Delete a VM and all its resources has gone GA. This is really focused around the idea, and it's probably easiest just to take a look at this. So if we jump over really quickly. So today, if I just go and look at a virtual machine, if I just look at my VM and I say delete it, it will show me the associated resources. And I can select them and say, hey, kind of delete with the virtual machine, but it's not selected by default. So what I can now do is, as part of the virtual machine creation, I can say, hey, look, when I do things in the future, I want you to actually go and kind of delete these things at the same time. So as part of the operations, when you do things, let's see, I want to see over here. There'd be an option also to delete. I don't know why it's not showing it in my portal, but there's an option in here as well that you can actually go and say, hey, I want you to delete this at the time of the VM creation as well. So I can go and configure that as a default. And then cross-region VM restore points. I previously talked about restore points. It's the idea that, well, hey, we have a virtual machine. I can have a VM restore point collection for a VM. Within that, I have VM restore points. This is a collection of individual disk restore points and the VM metadata that make up a certain point in time, consistent instance of it. So now what I can also do is I could take one of those and copy it to another region, or just create a restore point in another region. I'm going to create one of these restore point collections in that target region, then either copy to it or create directly into it. It's going to be super useful if I think about disaster recovery type scenarios, or maybe I'm just trying to clone something. I can now target another region and not just the region where the virtual machine sits. On the storage side, I've talked about this already. There was going to be a switch to the root and intermediary certificate signing authorities for Azure Storage. It was going to happen in February. It's basically just been pushed to July. So the signing authority is going to change from the current Baltimore Cyber Trust root to a DigiCert Global. And I did a demo a few weeks ago of what that cert would look like. Doesn't matter for most of us. It's only going to matter if you have an explicit trust cert list, i.e. certificate pinning, in which case, hey, I'm going to go and need to update that. On the database side, so for Postgres Hyperscale, remember Hyperscale is using the Citus extension, gives me distributed tables, like shard data across instances for great scale, great performance. There are new regions have gone GA, Central US, South Central US, West Central US, and West US. And then also there's a number of new certifications have gone GA as well. And we can go and look at the article when it goes through all of those different certifications that are now available. So I have that as well. Miscellaneous. Azure AAD Connect v2 is moving to a pattern of once it's over 12 months old, it's retired. So this is going to start in mid-March 2023, at which point any version that's mid-March 2022 will be retired. And then it's that 12-month window of what is essentially supported. Remember, the V1 of Azure AAD Connect, that retires end of August 2022 because of its dependencies on SQL 2012 and ADAL, they're retiring. So just we want to make sure we stay up to date on that. And remember, today, these don't typically auto-update. I need to go and update to new versions of the V2 Azure AAD Connect. Talking about Azure AAD Connect, the multi-tenant sync has gone GA. So this is huge. If I think about Active Directory, so what we've always had in the past is, hey, look, we have Active Directory. That's my AAD with all my objects in it. And then I could target one Azure AD. And to do that, I have AAD Connect. So I could have that one kind of relationship, and I could only sync to one Azure AD for a specific set of objects. So what they're now allowing you to do is I can have other Azure ADs. Now, they're going to have their own instances of AAD Connect. And really, when I think of the flow, for the most part, though, for the others, it's really flowing that way. I can't do the regular write back for the others. So that's going to mean things like seamless sign-on, hybrid Azure AD join is only going to work for one of them. The others, hey, I can still synchronize to. I can still synchronize passwords. And if I did change the password, that would sync back here and then sync to all of them. But for everything else, the write back is only happening on one of them. But these can be across different clouds. So for example, now I could go to commercial and I could go to Gov, for example. It doesn't have to be, they could be the same cloud. So that's a really great new capability. Carrying on. So also, we have Azure AD certificate-based authentication in preview. Now, this is going to open up a lot of new capabilities. The government has a new requirement around using smart cards. They have their PIVs, their personal identity verification cards for the US federal agencies, the CACs, the common access cards for Department of Defense. So these have certificates on those smart cards. And in the past, to use a certificate-based, i.e. an X.509 authentication, I had to do that on premises and use federation to actually get that authentication to Azure AD. So now I can actually plug it directly into Azure Active Directory. I'm going to be able to go and add cert-based to my Azure AD. And if we go and look at an Azure Active Directory, we'll see in preview, if I go and look at my security and my authentication methods, we can now see certificate-based authentication. Now, what we're going to do is we have to go and enable it, and then we can target particular groups of users. We would then have to go and upload the root and issuer certificates. We would go and configure the various authentication bindings, username bindings, for example, principal name to UPN. And then we can enable that certificate-based authentication. We can configure other attributes. Is this single factor or is this multi-factor authentication? But now if I have those requirements, I'm going to be able to use my smart cards directly against Azure Active Directory once I've configured this. And then when I go and authenticate, I'll type in my username, and there's going to be an option after I've done my username to say, head on and log on with a certificate. And there I go. So all native to Azure AD in preview. Azure Monitor alert processing rules have gone GA. If I think about alerting in the past, what we've had is I can always think about, okay, we had alert rules. So alert rules would go and look at certain things. It's looking at certain signals, and hey, I'm over a certain threshold. I'm going to fire my alert, which has certain properties. Now, separately from that, we have action groups. And remember, action groups can do stuff. Hey, I want to email someone or send an SMS message or call this RESTful API. I configure things I want to do. And we could, if we wanted to, trigger an action group from our alert rules. But the key point is we didn't have to, but it would fire off alerts. So what I can now do is we have this new alert processing rule. And as the name suggests, it lets me now look at the alerts that are fired, and then based on some scope, so this is great for doing things at scale, rather than me having to have 50 alert rules and then link into action groups, which I still can do. Now I can have, hey, at scale, well, look at all of the alerts that might fire for things in this resource group or of this certain type. And then for that, it can call an action group, or it can actually suppress. So I'll say, hey, maybe on this particular time or now or on this recurrence, don't trigger the actions that are being normally fired off by alert rule or alert processing rules. So this new alert processing rule is a really nice ability to manage those things at scale. And you can see those super easily if you go and look at my monitor and you look at alerts, look at alert rules. So there's my alert rules. So these are things that are looking at signals and create alerts. And then what we could also then do is we could have action groups, which are the things we want to do that we could call. But now we can separate those. We don't have to have action groups linked to from alert rules. I can separately create an alert processing rule, and that alert processing rule will look at a certain scope. I can filter it to certain types of resource. I could just say, hey, these resource groups, or I could say for these certain types of virtual machines, whatever I want to do. And then with that, I can configure what I actually want to do. It's running slowly today for some reason. But notice I could apply an action group, i.e. do something, or I could actually suppress. And I can make this always at a specific time in the future or on some kind of recurrence. So now it gives me the ability to suppress or fire off those actions via action groups at scale. So I can now separate that from the action rules themselves, so the alert rules themselves. Carrying on, Azure Virtual Desktop Personal Desktop Reassign has gone GA. So when I have those personal desktop session hosts, now I can unassign it from a particular user and then reassign it to someone else. I don't have to delete and recreate it. And then finally, resource configuration changes are available via resource graph. If I think about Azure Resource Manager in the control plane, any change I make, well, I can go and see it in the activity log. I could also go and see it, and there's the application. We go and look. So I always have the activity log for my subscription. There was also things like the application change analysis, which can, yes, show me things happening at the Azure Resource Manager level, but also I can even dive into things like the application to get a really good idea of everything that's happening in my environment. But I can also now access that. If I go and look at the resource graph, if I open a query, I can query it now through the resource graph. Remember, the resource graph is that fantastic, very scalable, I'm not having to go and query every resource individually, way to get information about things in the Azure Resource Manager. So it's a great way at scale to query my Azure subscriptions, my management groups, and more. But I can now query for changes using that Azure Resource Graph as well. So that is now available to me. And that's it. So that was all the changes. So as always, I hope that was useful. We did have a nice collection of updates this week. And until the next video, take care.